In this video, I would like to use a bash script to read a file, and in that file is going to contain a list of URLs. And then I'm going to discuss some problems that can arise in such a situation, and then propose some and try some solutions to that problem. Okay. So here in sort of version 1 of this problem, it works. I'm going to, in line 3 here, create a new folder, Austin, and move into it. And then I have this URL, this text file, and it's posted on my website that I'm going to read, jane.txt. I'm going to use wget to get that file in the quiet mode. I'm going to use base name to strip off the last part of the name. So then I know how to refer to it in the current working directory. And then 8 through 10, I'm looping over that file. So here's done with the $ file being read in, and then I'm reading lines of that file. This extra little or and square bracket -n. This is so I read the last line if there's not a blank line. So let's now have a look at this file. We were looking at Jane, and one of the things about what is going to make this first version of Jane as opposed to Jane 2, Jane is easier to read because it has these spaces. Let me grab Jane 2, which is going to be harder to read and cause the problems. And I'll say what the problems are and then some ways to fix them. Jane 2, the difference between Jane 1 and Jane 2 is that Jane 1 has a space before I move to the new line. Jane 2 does not have the space before I move to the new line. Another difficulty of both of these files is that there's no, you can see here in my Notepad++, the counting of the lines. I don't have a blank line at the bottom. Okay, what else do I need to tell you in the setup? That my host machine, right now I'm looking at this in my host machine, then I'll move to my Linux, my Ubuntu virtual machine to look at my bash program. But this text file was made in Windows and then sent over to my website and then read from there in Linux. And the end of line in the Windows world is different than in the Linux world. So in the Windows world, there tends to be 2 characters at the end. So in addition to the space, there is a character, the line feed, as well as the carriage return. So in Windows world, there's sort of 2 things, carriage return and line feed. Whereas in a normal Linux, the corresponding thing in Linux would just have just one, a new line character. So that there are 2 characters in there is going to complicate matters. Okay, the space sort of having a 3rd thing sort of saves us in this first version of Jane, but the 2 get sort of entangled a bit in Jane 2. And again, there was no blank line. And so here that is what fixed the blank line problem. So I'm going to do that sort of all along. One of the approaches, I'm going to use cat rather than read. So in cat, I won't need that. But for everybody else, I'm going to be using read in a while loop, and I will need this extra or to deal with the problem of the no blank line at the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to run it, see which ones work and which ones don't work, and then come back and explain. So I have Okay, well, let me just do what I said. Make sure I've saved it. I'm going to run it here. And I keep just downloading these files, and sometimes it's working and sometimes it's not. I made each one into its own little folder. So here, Austin, I read, this is the version of the file with the spaces at the end, and additional to having downloaded the file jane.txt itself, I downloaded 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 text files corresponding to Jane Austen novels that were stolen from Project Gutenberg, and they are posted on my website at the URLs found at jane.txt. So they all came down. That was Austen. When I start to read Jane_2 in Austen 2, we sort of do the same thing I did above successfully with Jane.txt. When I'm reading Jane2.txt, it's now failing. I brought down the last one, Mansfield Park, but I didn't bring down any of the other ones. The next version is similar. Again, reading Jane 2, again, I'm only getting the last one. And I'm not overwriting, it's that the downloading was not successful. But 4, I am now succeeding again. So everything after the first one is reading Jane_2, the version of the file without the text file, and so without the spaces at the end. And this succeeded and brought down all of the 6 novels. And so did version 5. There's Jane 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 Jane 2 plus the 6 text files. The 6 novel text files. Okay. All right. Now, let me try to scroll up a bit and see if I can find one of the errors and see what the errors are. Where is the not okay? Okay, file not found. Here's an example of file not found. And so it's going to a URL, http www1 LaSalle ~Blum Austin North Hanover, and then here is %0d. So that is that extra character. That is that carriage return character that's hanging on the end there of the URL and just confusing it, so then it's not being found. Mansfield Park worked because it was the last one, so there was I didn't have a blank line, and so Mansfield Park didn't have the carriage return, and that's why it succeeded where the other ones failed. %d, so I'm just going to bring up here. I have on the calculator already put in hex mode. I'm in my calculator, I'm in programmer mode. I entered hex. I put in a D that corresponds to 13. And if I'm bring up an ASCII table here and look at what's ASCII 13 or hex D, that is a carriage return. Make that a little bit bigger for you, get me out of the way. Here's 13 is D, is a carriage return. Okay, so that is that %D is the 13, is the ASCII character for the carriage return. So that's my problem, as I said it was. Okay. So again, in version 1, which worked because I had the space, I make a directory, I move into the directory, I get the file, I get the name of the file, I read the file. This OR is dealing with then I don't have a blank line at the bottom, and there was no problem getting that file. I got everything in version 1 because of the spaces. So there is, because I had in bash the standard field separator, the delimiter, the default delimiter, the IFS, is a combination of a space, a tab, and a new line character. And the space was saving us because it's one of the standard separators. So it was used as a separator, and the URL didn't have any of the carriage return hanging on because it was the separator of the space sort of came in and sort of saved it. So the space was before any carriage return and not a problem. Version 2 here, Austin 2, is the same as 1, except I'm reading that Jane 2 file, which doesn't have the spaces at the end. And then it began to fail because, as we saw, the URLs had this extra carriage return character on them, and then it was not finding those files. Okay. Now, my first attempt to fix it was to, instead of using read, to use cat. Cat sometimes handles some of the separators a little bit different than read, and so I thought maybe that would fix it. So I used cat. It broke it up based on the delimiter, but it still had the problem that there was it used the \n, but it still had the problem of the \r, the return characters, the carriage return still in there, still messing up the URLs. And so it did not work. Then I had 2 successes. And so in Austin 4, again, I'm still reading Jane 2. And what I did here in 39 was I sort of repaired the problem of the file using the bash command sed. Okay, so sed basically works as sort of a replace within a file. So I'm using the command sed. I am -I is going to allow me to sort of read and write to the same file. So I'm going to read $file, and then when I'm done doing my replacing, I'm going to put it back in $file. And it also allows, if you want to have some kind of backup in case something were to go wrong, which I didn't make. So that's the -I, is that the file read and the file written are the same file. Here's my \r, that's my return character. The // that there's nothing between there, so I'm placing my return character with nothing, and that final G is global. If you know regular expressions, you sort of know that /G for global. So any place where I find the carriage return character, I am going to replace it with nothing. So not just do the first replacement, but do all replacements. And then, so now when I read the file down in 42, I set up the 40 to 42 loop around the file. The file now has gotten rid of those carriage returns. And so this was a successful version because the carriage return was interfering with the URLs, but I've gotten rid of it. And so it is then not a problem. In my last version here, I take sort of, in some sense, the opposite approach. And instead of getting rid of the carriage returns in the file, I am adding them in as I'm adding the carriage return in as a separator. So it's sort of playing the same role in a way that the space did in the first one. That it is part of, I'm making it part of the standard IFS. So in 45, I'm just remembering what my standard IFS is so that back over when I'm done in 57, I can put it back as the way it was. In 47, I am establishing a new IFS, which is not only a new line character, but the /R, the carriage return character. And so I've defined a new, at least temporarily, a new IFS that includes the sort of thing more standard from Windows, the carriage return in addition to the line feed or the new line. And basically play the same game now, but now that /R, that carriage return, is one of my delimiters for the time being. And so I break up the line, I break up the file based on these delimiters, and I can successfully download from those URLs because the carriage return, now being a separator, is not in the lines and so not interfering with my URLs. So again, just to recap, the first version worked easily because there were spaces at the end. And again, this extra bit here is for that I had no blank lines. These files were made in the Windows world, so the end-of-line characters had really 2 characters, which is not what's normal in the Linux world. So that carriage return was causing a problem, and we saw that in Austin 2, that we only managed to pull down the last one. Version Austin 3 was an attempt to see if cat did any better. It did not, and that made sense. The /Rs were still there, so cat is using the same IFS for the most part, and so there was no this /R, the carriage returns were still a problem. In Austin 4, we dealt with the problem by editing the file and getting rid of the carriage returns, whereas in Austin 5, we instead added the carriage return to our list of delimiters. So 2 different approaches, but having the same overall effect. That's what I wanted to show you. Thanks much for your attention.